Hi friends, this is Sujata Eliguri from Vivekananda Nursing Academy. Today I am going to talk about cardiovascular system. So in cardiovascular system, cardio means heart, vessels means blood vessels. Okay, in blood vessels we have three types: arteries, veins and capillaries. So arteries carries oxygenated blood and arteries carries the blood away from the heart. Veins bring the blood to the heart. Veins bring deoxygenated blood to the heart. Okay, heart is hollow muscular pumping organ. So capillaries are the connections between arteries and veins. So capillaries are smallest arterioles and they connect between artery and vein. Okay, so let us see in detail how the heart is going to pump the blood and how it is receiving the blood and how it is pumping the blood to the parts of the body. Let us see in detail. Heart is a hollow muscular pumping organ. Heart is hollow muscular pumping organ. Main function of the heart is pumping. Okay. So, it is a hollow muscular pumping organ. It receives the blood from veins and it pumps the blood from the arteries. The arteries will carry away the blood from the heart to body parts. So, size of the heart. So, size of the heart will be like individual's own fist. And heart is situated in the thoracic cavity. Heart is situated in the thoracic cavity between the lungs. So, where is the heart? Heart is situated in the thoracic cavity between the lungs within the mediastinum and towards the left. So, towards the left you can see. So, between the lungs within the mediastinum towards the left, and heart has base and apex. So this we can call it as apex. This is the apex of the heart and this is the base of the heart. So this is the diaphragm which separates thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity. So heart is situated in the thoracic cavity slightly to the left side of the thoracic cavity on the diaphragm. It is situated on the diaphragm between second and fifth rib. Between second and fifth rib. Heart is located or situated between second and fifth rib. So heart is like cone shaped organ. Heart is cone shaped organ. This is the base and this is the apex. Heart pumps the blood in two circuits, like pulmonary circuit or pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. So pulmonary circulation ante, so heart nunchi manaku blood ఏ విధంగా lungs కి చేరుతుంది and from the lungs how it is comes back to the heart. Okay, so దాన్ని మనం pulmonary circulation అంటాం. Pulmonary circulation means how the blood is pumping to the lungs. Okay, so from the right ventricle, from the right ventricle through pulmonary artery, deoxygenated blood will pumped into the lungs. Okay, so pulmonary artery will carry away the blood to the lungs. Okay, so pulmonary artery carries the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Okay, so within the lungs exchange of gases will take place. So pulmonary veins will bring back oxygenated blood into the left atrium. So from the left atrium the blood will enters into left ventricle. So pulmonary circulation means the blood, deoxygenated blood which is ejecting from the right ventricle to the lungs and from the pulmonary veins, how it is getting back to the left atrium. So this is called pulmonary circulation. The blood is pumping to the lungs and from the lungs to the heart, how the blood is coming back. So that is called pulmonary circulation. So next is systemic circuit. So in systemic circulation, how the parts of the body is getting supplied. Okay, so how the heart is pumping to all the parts of the body or rest of the body is called systemic circulation. Systemic circulation. So in circulation we have pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. So kinds of blood vessels. As I said, we have three types of blood vessels: arteries, veins and capillaries. So arteries carry blood away from the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart and carry it to the capillaries. Okay. So arteries carries always oxygenated blood. Arteries carries always oxygenated blood. Okay. So capillaries. So capillaries are smallest arterioles or microscopic vessels. Capillaries are smallest arterioles or microscopic vessels when exchange between cells and blood takes place. Okay. So exchange here where exchange between cells and blood will takes place within the capillaries. Veins. So veins receive blood from capillaries and carry back to the heart. Okay. So arteries carry blood away from the heart and carry it to the capillaries. Veins will collect the blood from the capillaries and they carry it back to the heart. For example, so these are the arteries. Okay. So in between we have the capillaries and we have the veins. Okay. So arteries will carry the oxygenated blood and supply to the capillaries. So in the capillaries where exchange of gases will take place within the tissues. Okay. So this is called internal respiration. Usually the exchange between the tissues and capillaries. The exchange of gases which takes place between the tissues and the blood. Okay. That is called internal respiration. Okay. So from the capillaries this deoxygenated blood, okay, will enter into the veins. Okay. So these are the arteries. Capillaries are connections between arteries and veins. Two sets of pumping chambers in the heart. Okay. Two sets of pumping chambers, like two sets means, so right side is completely deoxygenated blood. So right side is completely deoxygenated blood and left side is oxygenated blood. Okay. So right atrium receives systemic blood. So right atrium receives systemic blood which is deoxygenated. Okay. So right ventricle will pump the blood to the lungs. Okay. Next, left atrium will receive oxygenated blood from pulmonary veins. Through pulmonary veins, left atrium will receive the oxygenated blood. Okay. Left ventricle will pump the blood into the aorta. Left ventricle will pump the blood into the aorta. So overview of the cardiovascular system, if we see systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. So if you see pulmonary circulation, so first initially we'll get, this is the right atrium. This is the right atrium. So this is right atrium, right ventricle. Left atrium, left ventricle. Okay. Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. So from all the parts of our body, all deoxygenated blood enters into right atrium from or through superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So మన బాడీలో ఉన్న ఏదైతే deoxygenated blood ఉందో from the capillaries it enter into the veins. So through veins, all the veins in the lower body or inferior body will drain into inferior vena cava. Okay. All deoxygenated blood. So all deoxygenated blood from lower parts of the body will be drained into inferior vena cava. From the superior parts of the body, all deoxygenated blood enters into superior vena cava. Okay. Superior vena cava and inferior vena cava will bring deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Okay. Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava will bring deoxygenated blood and drain into right atrium. Okay. From right atrium, this deoxygenated blood enters into right ventricle through atrioventricular valve. Okay. So from here, through pulmonary artery, usually all arteries carries oxygenated blood. Usually all arteries carries oxygenated blood. But here pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood. Pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood. Okay, so pulmonary artery will carry deoxygenated blood and it will bifurcate. Okay, it will bifurcate and it will take the blood into the lungs. So this is deoxygenated blood pumped into the lungs. Okay, so within the lungs, exchange of gases will take place. That is called external respiration. Within the lungs, what happens? Exchange of gases by the process of respiration, inspiration and expiration, and by external respiration. By external respiration, exchange of gases will take place within the lungs. Okay, so after that, after exchange of gases, oxygenated blood will come back to the heart. Okay, deoxygenated blood pumped into the lungs, and from the lungs, oxygenated blood will come back to the heart by pulmonary veins. Okay, through pulmonary veins. Okay, so pulmonary arteries carries deoxygenated blood, pulmonary veins carries oxygenated blood. So usually all veins carries deoxygenated blood except pulmonary vein. Okay, so pulmonary veins will bring oxygenated blood. Okay, so pulmonary veins will bring oxygenated blood to the left atrium. Okay, so this is called pulmonary circulation. So deoxygenated blood from the pulmonary artery, it enters into the lungs, and from the lungs through pulmonary veins, it comes back again to the left atrium. This is called pulmonary circulation. So coming to the systemic circulation. So once the blood, oxygenated blood enter into the left atrium, okay, in systemic circulation, once the blood is entered into the left atrium, this will be pumped into the left ventricle by bicuspid wall or by the mitral wall. Okay, so after that, after ventricle receiving the oxygenated blood, ఎప్పుడైతే మనకి oxygenated blood అనేది ventricles లోకి వచ్చిందో, from here through aorta, it will be pumped out to the all the parts of the body. So aorta will give branches, many branches to give supply to the total part of the body. So aorta అనేది మనకి కంప్లీట్ గా బాడీ పార్ట్స్ కి బ్లడ్ ని సప్లై చేస్తుంది. ఓకే, సో aorta is arised from the left ventricle. Okay, pulmonary artery arises from right ventricle. Okay, aorta arises from the left ventricle. So how the aorta pumps the blood to the parts of the body is called systemic circulation. So how the blood is going from the heart to lungs and how it is getting back to the heart is called pulmonary circulation. So heart has 4 chambers. Heart has 4 chambers. What are they? Right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. Okay, heart has 4 chambers like, okay, so right atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. Okay, so heart is surrounded by membrane called pericardium. So covering layer of the heart is called pericardium. So pericardium is fibroserous sac. Pericardium is fibroserous sac, means fibrous layer plus serous layer. Okay, so pericardium is made up of fibroserous sac, fibrous layer and serous layer. The heart and the roots of the great vessels. The pericardium is fibroserous sac that encloses the heart and the roots of the great vessels. The pericardium lies within the middle mediastinum. So you can see this is the pericardium. So pericardium, main function of the pericardium is to restrict excessive movement. Okay, so it restricts excessive movement of the heart as a whole and to serve as a lubricated container in which the different parts of the heart can contract. Okay, so the pericardium will restrict excessive movement of the heart as it is having it is a serous membrane, it contains like lubricated container. Okay, so pericardium, like pericardium is made up of fibroserous sac. Okay, so superficial fibrous pericardium. Pericardium can be divided into superficial fibrous pericardium. Okay, and deep 2-layer serous pericardium. Deep 2-layer serous pericardium. So the covering layers of the heart, if we see, we have 3 layers like pericardium, myocardium, which is made up of muscles. Pericardium is made up of fibroserous sac. This is fibroserous sac. And myocardium, endocardium. So endocardium is the innermost layer. Endocardium is the innermost layer. Myocardium is made up of muscle tissue, which helps in the contraction of the heart. Okay, so in these 3 layers, first one, superficial one, is pericardium. In this again the pericardium is divided into like 2 layers, superficial fibrous pericardium and deep 2-layer serous pericardium. Deep 2-layer serous pericardium. So in deep 2-layer serous pericardium, so parietal and visceral. So serous layer means it should have 2 layers. Serous layers means it should have 2 layers. అయితే మనకి సీరస్ లేయర్ అనేది నాట్ ఓన్లీ ఇన్ ద హార్ట్, మనకి ఇంకా అదర్ ఆర్గాన్స్లో కూడా కనిపిస్తుంది, లైక్ లంగ్స్. సీరస్ మెంబ్రెయిన్ మనం లంగ్స్లో కూడా చూడొచ్చు. సో లంగ్స్లో సీరస్ మెంబ్రెయిన్ ఏమంటాం, లంగ్స్ని కవర్ చేసే సీరాని వి విల్ కాల్ ఇట్ యాజ్ ప్లూరా. ఓకే, సీరస్ మెంబ్రెయిన్ విచ్ కవర్స్ ద లంగ్స్ ఈజ్ కాల్డ్ ప్లూరా. అండ్ అబ్డమిన్. సో అబ్డమిన్ని కవర్ చేసే సీరస్ మెంబ్రెయిన్ మనం పెరిటోనియం అనొచ్చు. వి విల్ కాల్ ఇట్ యాజ్ పెరిటోనియం. సో పెరిటోనియం ఇస్ ద లార్జెస్ట్ సీరస్ మెంబ్రెయిన్ ఇన్ అవర్ బాడీ. పెరిటోనియం అనేది లార్జెస్ట్ సీరస్ మెంబ్రెయిన్ ఇన్ అవర్ బాడీ. ఓకే, సో నౌ pericardium is fibroserous sac. Serous sac means it should have 2 layers. What are they? Parietal and visceral. Parietal and visceral. Okay, so in pericardium, outer or superficial fibrous pericardium, which is made up of fibrous. Okay, so this is fibrous layer. After that we have serous. Okay, so in serous this is parietal. So after that pericardial cavity and visceral. Okay, so this is serous membrane. Okay, serous membrane means it should have 2 layers and between these 2 layers some amount of fluid. Okay, this is called pericardial fluid. This is parietal and this is visceral. Parietal pericardium, visceral pericardium. In between these 2 layers we have some amount of fluid. So ee fluid ni manam pericardial fluid ani anachu. Okay, this is fibrous layer. So this is serous layer, fibroserous layer. So outer or superficial fibrous layer which is made up of fibrous. So serous layer is made up of parietal and visceral. In between these 2 layers there is some amount of fluid. So that fluid is called as pericardial fluid. So after this layer we have myocardium. After this we have myocardium and endocardium. So these are the complete covering layers of the heart. So we can call visceral layer of the heart is called epicardium. So you can see this is fibrous layer, superficial fibrous pericardium. Okay, deep serous membrane. In this serous, this is parietal, this is visceral. In between these 2 layers pericardial cavity, here we have pericardial fluid. Okay, so visceral layer also called as epicardium. Visceral layer of the serous pericardium is called as epicardium. And this is the myocardium which is having bulk of the mass or muscle mass. Okay, so this is myocardium is comprising of muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue. Okay, this is endocardium, which is innermost layer of the heart. Okay, so inside this we have chambers of the heart. Okay, this is about the pericardium. Next, blood supply to the pericardium. So blood supply manaki pericardium ki ఏ విధంగా వస్తుంది అంటే mainly by pericardiacophrenic branches. Mainly pericardium will supplied by the pericardiacophrenic branches from internal thoracic arteries. Okay, nerve supply is by phrenic nerve. Nerve supply by the phrenic nerve. So pericardium nerve supply by the fibrous pericardium and parietal layer of the serous pericardium are supplied by phrenic nerve. So heart wall. Heart wall is made up of, or it starts from, heart wall starts from visceral layer of the pericardium. So visceral layer means epicardium. Okay, visceral pericardium నుంచి మనకి heart wall అనేది స్టార్ట్ అవుతుంది. Epicardium means this is the visceral layer, then myocardium, endocardium. In between this we have fibrous skeleton. Okay, between myocardium and endocardium we have the fibrous skeleton. So the fibrous skeleton of the heart will have crisscrossing interlacing layer of the connective tissue. So fibrous skeleton of the heart, it will be like crisscross. Okay, so crisscrossing interlacing layer of the connective tissue. Okay, heart wall is made up of the layers which are found in the heart wall are epicardium, myocardium, fibrous skeleton and endocardium. So heart wall, visceral, pericardium, myocardium, endocardium and fibrous skeleton. So this is the heart wall. Epicardium, visceral layer is epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. Okay, so here we have between myocardium and endocardium, so crisscross tissue, that is called fibrous skeleton. Fibrous skeleton. Okay, so this epicardium is made up of simple squamous epithelium, loose connective tissue and fat. You can see simple squamous epithelium. So simple squamous epithelium means single layer. Simple squamous means flat shaped cells, single layer epithelium which will have the basement membrane. Simple squamous epithelium means basement membrane and flat cells. Okay, so this is made up of simple squamous epithelium. So the surfaces of the heart. So coming to the surfaces of the heart, it can be anterior, it can be posterior and inferior. So anterior part is like sternocostal area. Anterior region can be called as sternocostal surface. Okay, surfaces of the heart, anterior view will be like sternocostal region. Okay, it comprises of right atrium and atrioventricular groove, right ventricle. Okay, and the auricle of the left atrium. Anterior surface of the heart will comprising by right atrium, right ventricle. Okay, so right atrium, atrioventricular groove and left ventricle, small strip of the left ventricle and auricle of the left atrium. In anterior view, if we see the heart, the structures which we may see are like right atrium, right ventricle and small strip of left ventricle and the auricle of the left atrium we can find. Next, posterior view. In posterior view, we can see it is comprised by base. Posterior view is comprised by base. Mainly, it will have left atrium and receiving the 4 pulmonary veins. Okay, posterior view can be left atrium and pulmonary veins. Posterior view of the heart, we can find left atrium and pulmonary veins. Inferior or diaphragmatic area. Inferior region we can find right atrium, atrioventricular groove and both ventricles separated by interventricular groove. Okay, interventricular groove means which are separated. The ventricles are separated by the interventricular groove. So chambers of the heart. Coming to the chambers of the heart. So we have 4 chambers. Okay. So basically the heart is divided into right and left by the septal wall. The heart is divided into right and left by the septal wall. And coming to the chambers, like 4 chambers, right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. So atrias are the receiving chambers. Atrias are receiving chambers. Okay, atrias are the receiving chambers. Ventricles are the discharging chambers. Ventricles are the discharging chambers. So ventricles are the discharging chambers. Propel blood to the pulmonary trunk. So right ventricle will propel the blood into the into the pulmonary trunk. Okay, right ventricle will propel the blood into the pulmonary trunk, and the left ventricle will propel the blood into the aorta. Right atrium. So right atrium receives deoxygenated blood. So right atrium receives deoxygenated blood. Right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from inferior and superior vena cava. Okay. So inferior and superior vena cava will bring deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. So from inferior and superior vena cava, deoxygenated blood will enter into the right atrium. Okay. So even it receives the coronary sinus, it is in its lower part, the upper end of the atrium. So upper end of the atrium will be like the upper end of the atrium projects to the left of the superior vena cava, that is called as right auricle. Okay, projection of the right atrium is called as right auricle. Okay, so where is the right auricle? It is at the projection of the right atrium to the left of the superior vena cava. So just to the left of the superior vena cava, we can find the right auricle. Right auricle is the projection of the right atrium just to the left of the superior vena cava. So, sulcus terminalis. Sulcus terminalis is a vertical groove. Sulcus terminalis is a vertical groove. Okay, vertical groove on the outer surface of the atrium. On the outer surface of the atrium, we can find a vertical groove that is called as sulcus terminalis. Okay, so this groove corresponds internally to the crista terminalis. Sulcus terminalis will be outside. Okay, this will be outside. This is like vertical groove on the left outer surface of the left atrium. Outer surface of the atrium. The sulcus terminalis is a vertical groove on the outer surface of the atrium. This groove corresponds to the crista terminalis. This groove corresponds to the crista terminalis inside. Okay. Above the coronary sinus, we have the interatrial septum. Above the coronary sinus, we have the interatrial septum. So interatrial septum means the septum or the wall between the atria. Interatrial septum. These are the atrias. Okay. So right atrium and left atrium. This is interatrial septum. Okay. So here we have a depression. Okay. So in the interatrial septum we have the depression. So that is called fossa ovalis. This is called fossa ovalis. So during the fetal life, this fossa ovalis will be like foramen ovale. During the fetal circulation, so fossa ovalis may not be there. It will be like foramen ovale. So after the birth, this foramen ovale will be closed and will convert like fossa ovalis. Right ventricle. So right ventricle receives deoxygenated blood from the right atrium through tricuspid wall. Okay. So from the right atrium right atrium will pump the blood into the right ventricle through tricuspid wall. Through tricuspid wall. 3 cusps. It will have 3 cusps. Okay. The wall between right atrium and right ventricle is called as tricuspid wall. Okay. So, tricuspid wall will allow the blood from the right atrium to the right ventricle. Okay. So, within the right ventricle, the edges of the wall cusps. Okay. So, edges of the wall cusps. The edges of the walls of the cusps are attached lowerly to the papillary muscles. Okay. So, these are attached to the papillary muscles. Okay. So, here we have cardi tendinae. Okay. These are the atrioventricular walls are attached lowerly to the ventricle by cardi tendinae. By cardi tendinae. The wall of the right ventricle is thicker than the right atrium. Okay. The wall of the right ventricle is thicker than the atria. Okay. So, right ventricle wall is thicker than the atrial wall. Okay. So, you can see atrial walls are here very thick. Okay. So, ventricular wall, right ventricular wall is thicker than the atrias, but not thicker as much like left ventricle. Okay. So, right ventricle is thicker than atrias. The wall contains a mass of muscular bundle. Okay. Trabeculae carneae. These are called walls of the ventricle. Walls of the ventricle are made up of trabeculae carneae. The wall contains a mass of muscular bundles known as trabeculae carneae. Ventricular wall muscles. Ventricular wall made up of trabeculae carneae. So, the infundibulum is the smooth walled outflow tract of the right ventricle. Infundibulum is the smooth walled outflow of the right ventricle. So, here over the infundibulum we can see the or we can find pulmonary artery. So, infundibulum is the smooth walled outflow. Over the infundibulum. So, infundibulum paina manaki pulmonary artery anedi arise avutundi. Okay. Over the infundibulum we can have the pulmonary artery. Okay. So, pulmonary valve is situated at the top of the infundibulum. Infundibulum is the smooth walled outflow of the right ventricle. Okay. So, here we can find the infundibulum. Over the infundibulum we have the pulmonary artery. Okay. So, it is composed of 3 semilunar cusps. Okay. It composed of 3 semilunar cusps and blood flows through the valve and into the pulmonary arteries via the pulmonary trunk to be oxygenated into the lungs. Okay. So, the blood from the right ventricle pushed into the pulmonary artery. So, this blood is pumped to the lungs for oxygenation or for exchanging the gases. Okay. So, now left atrium. Okay. So, left atrium will receive which type of blood? Oxygenated blood. So, left atrium will receive oxygenated blood from lungs through pulmonary veins. Okay. So, pulmonary veins will bring oxygenated blood from lungs. Okay. Pulmonary veins will bring oxygenated blood from the lungs. Okay. So, the cavity is smooth walled except for the atrial appendage. Okay. So, here we can see the atrial appendages. On the septal surface, a depression marks. Okay. So, ఇక్కడ septals like atrial మధ్యలో మనకు ఒక septal depression ఉంది, that is called fossa ovalis. So, and the mitral valve is between left atrium and left ventricle. Between left atrium and left ventricle we have the mitral valve, or we can say bicuspid valve or mitral valve. left ventricle. So left ventricle is the wall of the left ventricle. Here the wall of the left ventricle is thicker than the right ventricle. So right ventricle wall is thicker than the atrial walls. Okay, right ventricle wall is thicker than atrial walls. Okay, so left ventricle wall is thicker than the right ventricle. So left ventricle wall is 3 times thicker than the right ventricle. Okay, so left ventricle wall is thicker than the right ventricle walls. So this why? Because this has to pump. అంటే మనకి లెఫ్ట్ వెంట్రికల్ అనేది ఆక్సిజనేటెడ్ బ్లడ్ని పంప్ చేయాలి సిస్టమిక్ సర్క్యులేషన్లో, కాబట్టి ఇక్కడ మనకి లెఫ్ట్ వెంట్రికులర్ వాల్ అనేది 3 times థిక్కర్ దాన్ ద రైట్ వెంట్రికులర్ వాల్. ఓకే, సో ద థిక్ వాల్ ఈజ్ నెససరీ. సో మనకి ఇక్కడ థిక్ వాల్ అనేది నెససరీ టు పంప్ ఆక్సిజనేటెడ్ బ్లడ్ ఇన్ టు ద systemic circulation. So trabeculae carneae project from the wall with papillary muscles. Okay, trabeculae carneae will form the ventricular walls. Atrial walls are by pectinate muscles. Okay, trabeculae carneae will form the ventricular walls. Vestibule. So the vestibule is the smooth walled part of the left ventricle, okay, which is located below the aortic wall. Okay, so below the aortic wall we have the vestibule. So this is the aorta. Okay, so just below the aorta we have the vestibule. Vestibule is the smooth walled part of the left ventricle which is located below the aortic wall. Next, heart valves. Heart valves ensure unidirectional blood flow. Heart valves will ensure unidirection, means only one direction. So మనకి blood flow heart valves నుంచి ఏ విధంగా ఉంటుంది, ఓన్లీ వన్ డైరెక్షన్లో ఉంటుందన్నమాట. ఓకే, సో ఇట్ ఈస్ heart valve ensure unidirectional blood flow through the heart. It is composed of an endocardium with connective tissue core. So two major types, they are atrioventricular valves and semilunar valves. Atrioventricular valves and semilunar valves. So atrioventricular valves are situated between atria and ventricles. Semilunars are present in the right atrium and in the left atrium. So right atrium we have, it is between like pulmonic wall. Okay, in the right ventricle we have pulmonic wall and in the left ventricle aortic wall. These are the semilunar valves. Atrioventricular valves are tricuspid wall between right atria and right ventricle, bicuspid wall between left atria and left ventricle. So here you can see, this is aortic valve, this is pulmonic valve, this is present in right ventricle. Okay, this is tricuspid valve between right atria and right ventricle. This is bicuspid wall between left atria and left ventricle. Atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular valves, right atrioventricular valve is tricuspid valve. It separates the right atrium from the right ventricle and prevents backflow into the atrium. Left atrioventricular valve is called bicuspid valve. Okay, this prevents backflow into the atrium. Semilunar valves, pulmonary valves and aortic valve. So pulmonary valve separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary arteries. Okay, it prevents backflow into the ventricles. Aortic valve, it separates the left ventricle from the aorta. It prevents backflow into the left ventricle. So atrioventricular valves lie between atria and ventricles, tricuspid and bicuspid valve. Okay, so here cardi tendinae anchor AV valves to papillary muscles, ventricular valve. So they prevent prolapse of valve back into the atrium. Semilunar valves. Semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are aortic valve and pulmonic valve. Okay, semilunar valves will prevent backflow blood into the ventricles. So ventricles loki manaki blood rakunda semilunar valves like aortic valve and pulmonic valve will helps. So these semilunar valves will not have any cardi tendineae. No cardi tendineae attachment in semilunar valves. So aortic semilunar valve lies between the left ventricle and aorta. So pulmonary semilunar valve or pulmonic valve. This is aortic valve and this is the pulmonary valve. So heart sounds. So coming to the heart sounds, they make like lub dub due to closure of these valves. These valves will close. Okay. So due to closure of these valves, there will be a sound. Okay. So that sound is called as heart sounds. Those sounds are called as heart sounds. Okay. Lub and dub. Lub means closing of atrioventricular valves. Okay. Closing of atrioventricular valves will produce lub. Okay. So closing of semilunar valves will produce dub. So మనకి లబ్ డబ్ అనే హార్ట్ సౌండ్స్ వినిపిస్తాయి. సో ఎలా వస్తుంది ఈ హార్ట్ సౌండ్స్, హౌ కెన్ వి హియర్ అంటే మెయిన్లీ బై క్లోజర్ ఆఫ్ ఏట్రియోవెంట్రిక్యులర్ వాల్స్. ఓకే, ట్రైకస్పిడ్ వాల్ బైకస్పిడ్ వాల్ క్లోజర్ వల్ల మనకి లబ్ అనే సౌండ్ వస్తుంది. ఓకే, సో డబ్ అనే సౌండ్ మనకి క్లోజర్ ఆఫ్ పల్మోనిక్ వాల్ అండ్ అయోటిక్ వాల్. Closure of semilunar valves will produce dub. Okay, these are heart sounds. So you can see right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Okay, so here clearly you can see, so right ventricular wall is thin compared to the left ventricle. So this is 3 times thicker than the right ventricle. So enduku ante manaki, so ఆక్సిజనేటెడ్ బ్లడ్ని సిస్టమిక్ సర్క్యులేషన్లోకి పుష్ చేయడానికి సో ఈ థిక్నెస్ అనేది అవసరం లెఫ్ట్ వెంట్రికల్కి. ఓకే, సో దీస్ ఆర్ ద కస్ప్స్. దిస్ ఈస్ ట్రైకస్పిడ్ వాల్, దిస్ ఈస్ ట్రైకస్పిడ్ వాల్ ఆర్ ఏట్రియోవెంట్రిక్యులర్ వాల్, దిస్ ఈస్ bicuspid valve. Only 2 cusps you can see, 1 2 3 tricuspid, this is bicuspid. Okay, bicuspid valve. So these are the cardi tendineae, they anchor to the atrioventricular valve. These are the cardi tendineae. So these are papillary muscles. Ivi papillary muscles. This is the ventricular valve. These are papillary muscles, cardi tendineae and atrioventricular valves. Arterial supply of the heart. Okay, so heart is supplied by coronary arteries. Blood supply to the heart by coronary arteries. Okay, blood supply to the heart mainly by coronary arteries. Okay, so the arterial supply of the heart is provided by right and left coronary arteries. Right and left coronary arteries, they arises from ascending aorta. Okay, so this is the ascending aorta. Okay, actually this aorta arises from the left ventricle. Okay, aorta arises from the left ventricle and as it is going up we can say ascending aorta. So this is called, which is formed like arch, దీన్ని మనం arch of aorta అంటాం. ఓకే, ఈ ascending aorta నుంచి మనకి right and left branches, you can say this is the right coronary artery, this is the left coronary artery. Okay, coronary arteries will arise from ascending aorta. Okay, so this is right coronary artery and left coronary artery. So again this right coronary artery will be branches, will be formed into branches to give supply to the heart. Okay, so these are like marginal arteries. Right coronary artery again will be divides like a marginal arteries. So left coronary artery also will be divided into branches like left anterior descending artery. So this is left anterior descending artery, left anterior descending artery and this is the circumflex artery. Okay, so they will form like a collateral circulation. So manaki blood supply to the heart mainly by collateral circulation. సో కొలాటరల్ సర్క్యులేషన్ వల్ల ఏంటంటే ఒక ఆర్టరీ మనకి బ్లాక్ అయినా కూడా హార్ట్కి బ్లడ్ సప్లై అనేది స్టాప్ అవ్వదు. ఓకే, ఇంకొక ఆర్టరీ అనేది మనకి బ్లడ్ సప్లై చేస్తుంది. సో దట్ దాన్ని మనం కొలాటరల్ సర్క్యులేషన్ అంటాం. ఓకే, సో ద ఆరిజిన్స్ ఆఫ్ కరోనరీ ఆర్టరీస్ లైక్ లెఫ్ట్ కరోనరీ ఆర్టరీ arises from the aortic sinus. Okay, and the left posterior cusp of the aortic wall. So right coronary artery arises from the aortic sinus immediately above the anterior cusp of the aortic wall. Okay, this is left and this is the right coronary artery. Okay, so they will form like a collateral. Okay, branches, right side, right marginal arteries and posterior interventricular artery. So right coronary artery branches, right marginal arteries, okay, and posterior interventricular arteries. Right side, posterior interventricular arteries and sinoatrial nodal artery. So sinoatrial nodal artery, SA node, okay, the arteries which will give blood supply at SA node. Okay, so sinoatrial nodal artery and atrioventricular nodal arteries from the right coronary artery. From right coronary artery, so right marginal arteries, posterior interventricular arteries, sinoatrial nodal arteries and atrioventricular nodal arteries. These are the branches of right coronary artery. Next, left coronary artery. So left coronary artery will be divided into like left marginal arteries, left anterior descending artery and interventricular artery. Left anterior descending artery, LAD. Okay, so left anterior descending artery, left anterior descending artery or anterior interventricular artery. Okay, so this will be given again branches like septal branches and diagonal branches. Okay, so and left marginal arteries. So right side we have the right marginal arteries. In the same way, left side left marginal arteries plus left circumflex artery. Left side arteries will be divided into left anterior descending arteries, left marginal arteries. So left marginal artery and left circumflex artery. So you can see how they form like collateral circulation. You can see. So this is right coronary artery and this is the left coronary artery. This is the circumflex artery. Okay. So they formed anastomosis. Okay. So దీన్ని మనం collateral circulation అంటాం. Venous drainage. So venous drainage of the heart by coronary sinus. Venous drainage mainly by the coronary sinus. Okay. So coronary sinus, all the veins will be drained into the coronary sinus. You can see this is small cardiac vein. Okay. This is middle cardiac vein and great cardiac vein. So all veins from the heart, small cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein and great cardiac vein. So all these veins will be drained into coronary sinus. Okay. So మనకి venous drainage of the heart అంటే హార్ట్లో ఉన్న deoxygenated blood మనకి ఏ విధంగా డ్రైన్ అవుతుంది అంటే it will drain into coronary sinus by small cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein and great cardiac vein. So these three veins together will drain into coronary sinus. So nerve supply to the heart. So it is mainly by sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, parasympathetic fibers of the autonomic nervous system via the cardiac plexus. Okay, which are situated just below arch of aorta. Okay, parasympathetic nervous system mainly by cardiac plexus which are situated below the arch of aorta. Okay, sympathetic supply which arises from the cervical and upper thoracic portions of the sympathetic trunks and parasympathetic supply even comes from the vagus nerve. So pathway of the blood. So how the blood is flowing. Okay, so pathway of the blood. So from superior and inferior vena cava, all deoxygenated blood enters into right atrium. From right atrium, the blood enters into right ventricle through tricuspid wall. So from here, through pulmonary artery, the blood will be pumped into the lungs. Okay, so within the lungs, exchange of gases will take place and again the blood will come back to the left atrium. So from the left atrium, oxygenated blood will enter into the left ventricle by bicuspid wall or by the mitral wall. So from here, through aorta, it will supply to the parts of the body or it will pump to the systemic circulation. So this is the pathway of the blood. So this is complete oxygenated and this is deoxygenated blood. So in between we have the capillaries. Okay. So these are the veins and arteries. So arteries will supply to the capillaries. So within the capillaries, exchange of gases will take place. This deoxygenated blood will enter into the veins. From the veins, so deoxygenated blood will carry to the heart through inferior and superior vena cava. This is about the anatomy of the heart.